At over 29,000 feet, the air gets so thin that even breathing feels like a battle. Welcome to Everest's death zone, where the human body slowly shuts down and survival isn't guaranteed, even for the most prepared climbers. It was May 14, 2025. Two men were preparing for what should have been the most triumphant moments of their lives. One was an engineer from the Philippines, on a mission far deeper than just personal glory. The other, a climber from West Bengal, had dreamed of Everest for years and had finally made it to the final push. But in less than 24 hours, one of these men would lie cold in a tent, his heart quietly stopping in the night, and the other would make a choice so bewildering that even seasoned mountaineers still can't make sense of it. Let's unpack what really happened during the first Everest deaths of 2025. Deaths that challenge everything known about survival instinct, high-altitude physiology, inhuman resolve. Philip Santiago, the quiet end in Camp 4. When the lights of headlamps began dotting the landscape around Camp 4 that night, it looked like any other summit push evening on Everest. But one of those lights belonged to someone special. Philip Santiago, a 45-year-old engineer from the Philippines. He wasn't a professional climber or a trust fund adventurer. He was a blue-collar worker who had saved for years, trained for months, and carried a covenant with God to make this journey mean something. His goal wasn't just reaching the top of the world. It was raising awareness for children with cancer and communities lacking clean water. But as he arrived at Camp 4, something seemed off. His teammates noticed his shoulders slumped. His words came out like whispers, short and breathy. Instead of the electric excitement that should have been radiating from someone hours away from the summit, Santiago looked empty. He unclipped from the fixed line, crawled into the nearest tent, and muttered his final words. Something simple, something like, "I'll rest now." No alarms went off, no frantic yells, just a man exhausted lying down to recover. But Camp 4 isn't a normal resting place. This is 26,000 feet, the death zone. Even lying still, the body is deteriorating. The lungs fill slowly with fluid. The heart beats harder, faster. The brain begins starving for oxygen. This flat stretch of snow and tents, it's a trap, a deceptively calm place where many have quietly slipped into death. At midnight, alarms beeped across the camp as climbers readied themselves for the summit push. Santiago's tentmate reached over to shake him awake, but there was no response. He tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. Philip Santiago was already gone. His skin was cold. There was no pulse. He had died silently, no struggle, no visible warning. The official cause of death? Undetermined, likely exhaustion or altitude sickness. But climbers familiar with the death zone know the likely culprits: pulmonary edema when fluid fills the lungs, or cardiac arrest from pure overexertion. And here's the part that haunts. Philip had probably been dying even as he arrived at Camp 4. The signs were all there: ragged breathing, slow speech, fatigue too deep to fake. A quick pulse oximeter check and an immediate descent might have saved him. But on Everest, there's no medic at Camp 4, no mandatory turnaround. Once inside the death zone, it's every climber for themselves. And Philip, he lost his battle without even knowing it. Goche, the man who sat down and never moved again. But as tragic as Philip's passing was, the second Everest death of 2025 is the one that truly stunned the climbing world. Goche, 45, from Ranagat, West Bengal, had trained for years. He'd signed up with a reputable guide service and had an experienced Sherpa by his side, Goche Tamang. This was a man who had followed the Everest dream step by step. But one decision, seemingly minor, set off a chain of events that spiraled into something no one could have predicted. Goche wanted to start his summit push at 10 p.m. Not a huge deal, right? Except it was. Timing is everything on Everest. Most climbers begin between midnight and 2 a.m. to avoid afternoon storms. Starting at 10 p.m. meant they were going in blind. No one ahead of them to call in weather updates. And Everest, as always, doesn't care how badly anyone wants it. Right from the start, Goche's energy seemed off. His steps were heavy, his pacing uneven. Tamang kept checking on him, hoping he would find his rhythm. But the higher they went, the more unstable things became. Every step Goche took required effort beyond normal limits. He stopped often, clutching his knees, breathing in sharp, wheezing gasps. At one point, he even stumbled sideways into the snow, needing help to stand again. Tamang asked him if he wanted to turn back, but Goche shook his head. "I've waited too long for this," he said, eyes locked on the summit above. Tamang decided to go with him. Hour by hour, the duo inched their way upward. The temperature plunged to -40. Winds howled at 60 miles per hour. Goche was gasping for every step. Still, he pushed. Still, Tamang stayed by his side. By sunrise, they were still climbing, already dangerously behind schedule. By 11 a.m., the weather turned. Other climbers reported violent winds so bad they could only stay on the summit for 15 minutes. Goche didn't care. He kept going. Sometime that afternoon, he reached the top of the world. 29,032 feet. He had done it. He had reached the summit of Everest. But that's not where the story ends. That's where it takes a turn no one saw coming. The descent becomes a nightmare. Climbers often say, reaching the summit is only halfway, and nowhere is that more true than Everest. The descent is where most fatalities happen. Goche was exhausted, out of breath, and now running low on oxygen, but he was still moving, that is, until they reached the Hillary Step. This 40-foot wall of rock and ice sits at 28,700 feet. Descending, it is like threading a needle in a hurricane. One wrong step can mean a fall of 10,000 feet. And it's here, at the most dangerous part of the mountain, that Goche stopped. He turned to Tamang and said 4 chilling words. "I can't see anything." But it was what he said next that truly broke every instinct of survival. "I won't move." Those words stopped Tamang in his tracks. Climbers freeze when hearing that phrase, because that's not something the human brain usually says in life or death situations. But Goche wasn't panicked. He wasn't flailing or unconscious. He had simply shut down. It's called the freeze response. Not as famous as fight or flight, but just as real. It kicks in when the brain decides no action is possible. In Goche's case, it was severe altitude sickness, shutting down his mind, his judgment, and possibly even his will to live. Tamang begged, pleaded, yelled over the wind. He reminded Goche of his family, his dream, his accomplishment. For hours, he tried to get him to move. Goche didn't budge. The Sherpa's last stand. Most guides would have left by then, not out of cruelty, but out of survival. But Tamang didn't. He did what almost no one could believe. He tried to drag Goche down the mountain. 4 hours. That's how long Tamang pulled, pushed, and lifted Goche across jagged ice and rock in hurricane conditions. And how far did they get? 300 feet, the length of a football field. That's all. At sea level, that's a warm-up jog. But at 28,000 feet, with only a third of the oxygen the human body needs, every movement feels like climbing with an elephant on your back. Eventually, Tamang collapsed next to Goche. His oxygen was gone. His body was shutting down. And here came the ultimate decision. One no training manual can prepare anyone for. Stay and almost certainly die with Goche, or leave him and try to survive. Tamang had a choice to make. He had tried everything. He had given everything, but staying any longer meant neither of them would make it. So Tamang turned and walked away, alone, oxygen-starved, hallucinating, barely able to think. One returned. One remained. Somehow, against every odd, Tamang made it back to Camp 4. Climbers found him barely coherent, suffering frostbite and altitude confusion. It took 2 full days before he could even explain what had happened. Search teams eventually reached the Hillary Step, and there, sitting in the snow, still in his gear, exactly where he had said, was Subrata Goche, frozen, peaceful, still. He never moved again. What makes this tragedy so disturbing isn't just that Goche died. Climbers die on Everest every year. It's that he made a conscious choice to stop trying, to sit down and never get up. Other climbers in worse condition have managed to survive. Some have crawled, some have descended blind. But Goche had accomplished his dream. He'd made it to the top, and maybe, just maybe, that was all he ever needed. Lessons from the death zone. So many things about these stories don't add up in the traditional sense. Why didn't Philip turn around? Why didn't Goche fight to stay alive? Maybe that's what makes these deaths so memorable. They weren't just medical outcomes. They were emotional collisions of dreams, preparation, exhaustion, and decisions made in the thinnest air on Earth. Both men had dedicated years of their lives to this climb. They had the gear, the guides, the training. On paper, they were ready. But Everest doesn't grade climbers on paper. It exposes every weakness, physical or psychological. Philip wasn't reckless. He was careful, faithful, humble. But the mountain drained him faster than anyone realized. Goche didn't collapse in a panic. He chose to sit. That's what unsettles so many. The quiet acceptance in his final moments. And what about Tamang? He'll carry those 8 hours for the rest of his life. The weight of trying, the guilt of leaving, but also the strength of doing what no one else would. He didn't just lose a client. He lost a human being he tried desperately to save. His decision to leave wasn't out of coldness. It was survival. And even then, he nearly didn't make it down himself. Some will always question if he could have done more. But most who understand the death zone know he did more than almost anyone could. What happened on Everest in May 2025 isn't just about climbing. It's about the limits of human will, the unpredictability of our minds under pressure, and the razor-thin line between triumph and tragedy. These weren't just deaths on a mountain. These were stories of sacrifice, of courage, and of the haunting silence that can follow a dream fulfilled too late. The mountain doesn't care how much someone trained. It doesn't care what promises were made or how big the dream is. Everest humbles everyone eventually, and in 2025, it reminded the world that no summit is worth a life, and that even the strongest can fall silent when the mountain whispers back, "Thanks for being here." If these stories made you pause, reflect, or simply left you speechless, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. For more extreme survival stories, psychological deep dives, and raw human courage from the most unforgiving places on Earth, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Until next time, stay bold, stay prepared, and always respect the mountain.